Is Javier Milei Argentina's savior, or is he taking the country to the brink of collapse? In his first months in office, he managed to reduce the trend towards imminent hyperinflation that was projected to reach 17,000% to 28% annually. But on the other hand, poverty rose 12.8 percentage points and reached 52.9% in the first half of 2024. Are we facing an economic miracle or a social time bomb? Javier Milei burst onto the Argentine political scene as an unprecedented phenomenon. With a radical speech and promises of economic transformation, he won the support of 14.5 million Argentines, winning 56% of the votes in the presidential elections. His victory reflects the desperate desire for change of a nation mired in a crisis that has been unresolved for decades. It has the lowest proportion of deputies and senators that any party in government has ever had. It has no governors of its own, nor mayors, and to complete its cabinet of ministers, it had to call on former officials from other governments. Will it be able to fulfill its ambitious promises, or will it join the long list of leaders who failed in the attempt to save the Argentine economy? Argentina is experiencing a radical economic experiment. The shock implemented by Javier Milei shook the foundations of the state, and the initial numbers are shocking. Milei's chainsaw began to roar from the first day of his mandate. His strategy, a brutal cut in public spending and a drastic reduction of the state apparatus. The elimination of half of the ministries was only the beginning. Thousands of public employees were fired, and public works were paralyzed throughout the country. A shock that many considered necessary, but whose magnitude surprised even the staunchest defenders of the free market. The immediate impact of these measures was not long in coming. In the first month of his administration, Milei achieved what seemed impossible, reaching a zero deficit. Wholesale inflation, a key indicator for understanding price dynamics, experienced an even steeper fall, from 54% to 2.1% per month in the first month of his government. These results generated euphoria in certain sectors and cautious optimism in others. Are these results sustainable over time, or are we facing a short-term economic illusion? The main concern lies in the lack of structural reforms to accompany these drastic cuts to make them sustainable. Dr. Ricardo Arriazu explains it more clearly.
Todo programa económico tiene dos partes. Una parte que es bajar la inflación, realinear precios relativos, solucionar el sector externo, y otra parte que son las reformas estructurales. Sin el primero nunca llego al segundo. Sin el segundo, el primero no aguanta. Lo primero que hay que entender es que Argentina es una economía bimonetaria, y una economía bimonetaria funciona totalmente distinta a una economía de una sola moneda. En Argentina el peso se usa para las pequeñas transacciones, para pagar sueldo y impuestos y para medir la inflación. Y todo el resto lo usamos con el dólar. El argentino piensa en dólares. Si yo tengo una economía bimonetaria, para eliminar la inflación tengo que estabilizar las dos unidades de cuenta, el peso y el dólar. El peso dejando de emitir y el dólar estabilizando el dólar, el tipo de cambio nominal. Pero detrás de eso está la situación fiscal, porque la situación fiscal, si tengo déficit, es lo que me impide dejar de emitir y es lo que me genera el déficit externo. Entonces, si yo no elimino el déficit fiscal, por definición no puedo estabilizar ninguna de las dos unidades de cuenta. Y si ahí, digamos, estabilizo el dólar, tarde o temprano va a explotar. Bueno, acá la ventaja es que no es que es un ministro que tiene que convencer a un presidente. Es un presidente que está convencido de eso.
Argentine history is full of adjustment plans that promised to be the definitive solution and ended in failure. Will it be different this time? Milei bet everything on shock therapy, rejecting any type of gradualism. His argument is that the situation was so critical that there was no time for half-hearted measures, and that the experience of former President Macri showed that the middle class is short-sighted and cannot bear the weight that reforms demand. But this approach carries enormous risks.
Porque cuando el gradualismo fracasa, y siempre fracasa, ¿qué es lo que ocurre? Lo que ocurre es que los ciudadanos le echan la culpa al gobierno de centroderecha, liberal, etcétera, que ha llevado a cabo esas políticas graduales, de no solamente el hecho de que no se han solucionado los problemas, sino también de la herencia recibida.
Popular support, crucial to sustaining any economic program, is being put to the test. Argentines, tired of recurring crises, are showing a mix of hope and skepticism. Many are willing to make sacrifices if they see concrete results. But patience has limits, and there are also political interests mobilizing reactions because many politicians and media outlets have lost their business with the state.
Yo acostumbro a decir cómo viene el programa económico, la primera parte. Viene mucho mejor de lo esperado. Si alguien me dirá, pero usted está loco. 71% de inflación, caída de actividad económica, caída del salario real. ¿Y qué diablos creen que era esperable con una devaluación del 150% para exportaciones y 300% para importaciones? La gente cree que esto lo paga un extranjero. No, es un cambio de precio relativo y es un impuesto que lo pagan los argentinos. Entonces, cuando uno compara, tiene que comparar con lo que uno proyectaba que iba a pasar. Y viene mucho mejor de lo esperado. Ahora, Argentina es famosa por desaprovechar todas las oportunidades y en el medio está la política.
Milei's challenge is enormous. He must maintain the course of the reforms despite the interests he faces and deal in the best way possible with the social mood of a society increasingly hit by the adjustment. The next few months will be crucial to determine whether this drastic change of economic direction can be sustained over time, or whether, as so often in the past, Argentina will be forced to turn back, losing what has been achieved. The adjustment promised to be the cure to straighten out the Argentine economy, but at what price? In just 6 months, poverty indicators rose alarmingly, and this unleashed reactions and activated arguments for an opposition that questions the entire model. Are we facing a necessary sacrifice to overcome a model of failure or the beginning of an unprecedented social crisis?
El gobierno parece, pues, estar llevando a cabo una política monetaria correcta para sanear la maltrecha economía argentina, pero a un alto costo social. La fuerte recesión económica ha traído consigo pérdida de empleo y aumento de la pobreza y la desigualdad. Según el Observatorio de la Deuda Social de la Universidad Católica Argentina, que mide indicadores socioeconómicos, la pobreza subió 11 puntos desde finales de 2023, cuando asumió Milei, un salto sin precedentes en 2 décadas. En 2002, el peor momento llegó al 57,5%. En el primer trimestre del año, la pobreza trepó al 55,5% y la indigencia al 17,5%. Eso implica que unos 25 millones de argentinos son pobres y de ellos 8 millones indigentes.
The figures are overwhelming. The poverty rate was 52.9% during the first half of 2024 under Milei's administration, an increase of 12.8 percentage points compared to 40.1% in the same period in 2023. This dramatic increase reveals the crudest face of the austerity measures implemented by the government in sectors that have been stuck in economic survival activities for years. Behind the encouraging numbers of inflation reduction and zero deficit lies a social reality of structural poverty that has been living in marginality, social labor, and economic exclusion for more than 30 years, and that proliferates in urban peripheries in the form of shantytowns, favelas, or precarious settlements where people lack everything. Argentina has had chronic poverty problems for more than 40 years, and the economy has not grown for 11 years. As shown in the graph prepared by the report of the Center for the Implementation of Public Policies for Equity and Growth, (CEPIC), poverty, measured since the advent of democracy in the country, only decreased in the rebound caused by the 2 deep macroeconomic crises that the country experienced, and in a period of exceptional external circumstances during part of the year 2000. Argentina, like the rest of Latin America, has an unresolved problem with poverty and its generating factors. Although Argentina had been containing the most impoverished population with welfare policies, the results of the last population census in 2022 show that the growth and proliferation of pockets of chronic poverty has been growing for 30 years, without effective policies being able to be achieved for the integration of these sectors into the formal economy, perpetuating a situation of dependence on state aid. Finally, over the years, these social sectors ended up being used by the structures of partisan politics as electoral spoils to secure votes, and a relationship of clientelistic politics was formed that generated dependence on the perks that came from the state. To the surprise of the political sector, these sectors were some of the main voters of Javier Milei. The new government created a Ministry of Human Capital and substantially increased the budget for social assistance, but had to deal with countless social organizations that mediated the delivery of economic aid in exchange for the demand for political militancy and attendance at protest marches. By eliminating the middlemen, family allowances were increased and subsidies were granted directly from the state to each beneficiary, and perhaps for that very reason, the usual demonstrations blocking the streets are not seen in the central streets. The government says that they do not march because no one can force them to do so anymore, and the opposition says that they do not do so for fear of repression by the government, which implemented an anti-picket protocol that forces them to march on the sidewalk, and if someone blocks the street, they are identified and their state assistance is taken away. The truth is that for 5 months, there have been no more picket marches in the city of Buenos Aires, and street blockades are no longer a daily problem. The impact of the adjustment on the quality of life of Argentines is palpable. The loss of purchasing power had become a constant for millions of families. Any increase in wages was neutralized and overcome by inflation. Only from July 2024, INDEC was able to show that the salary index increased by 7.5% and was able to exceed the inflation rate of that same month, which had been 4%, demonstrating that lowering inflation is the best way to restore wages. Salaries only began to show signs of recovery at this stage, with increases of 15.1% for unregistered workers, 6.3% for registered private sector employees, and 6.7% for public employees. The declining inflation allowed for a real increase in purchasing power, but the daily struggle to make ends meet remains a very difficult task to achieve, because when the government removed the subsidies that the state had been applying to rates, it caused a direct rise in the cost of living due to increases in water, electricity, gas, and transportation services that ended up absorbing what had been achieved in salary recomposition. Families are having a hard time covering their monthly expenses. The economic effort involves not only rationalizing the use of services to reduce consumption, but also restricting all types of additional spending until rising salaries and falling inflation give them more purchasing power. As a result, consumption has dropped dramatically and the economy is going through a few months of recession, which is causing concern throughout the commercial sector. Unemployment, another consequence of a stagnant economy, is just beginning to show its first positive data. Mass layoffs in the public sector and the halting of public works had generated an initial impact that affected the sectors closest to the eternal beneficiaries of state contracts, but which were also drivers of the economy, so they extended their ripple effect. Official data show that in the last 12 years, private salaried employment has stagnated. Only 180,000 jobs were created between 2012 and 2024. The economic matrix of job creation is deteriorated and produces poor quality jobs or jobs that do not respond to market reality. To understand this clearly, in the last 12 years, the total universe of registered workers increased by more than 2.3 million, but the sectors that drove this increase were mainly public employment, with almost 900,000 jobs, the single tax with almost 800,000 people, and the social single tax with 430,000 people, which also explains the crisis of the pension system with a very high rate of retirees in relation to contributors. Government defenders argue that the current pain was inevitable to clean up a macroeconomy devastated by decades of mismanagement. They argue that without these drastic measures, Argentina was heading towards hyperinflation and a total economic collapse. Argentina's options at the end of 2023 were hyperinflation or recession. Milei avoided hyperinflation with very good results and is emerging from the vortex of the recessionary hurricane with indicators that show that it would have already hit the bottom in terms of falling activity in several sectors, and in some it is already clearly growing. The foreign direct investment position from December 2023 to August 2024, according to INDEC data, has already grown by $30 billion, so other countries are already seeing an interesting market in Argentina's indicators. Now the challenge is focused on the management of the microeconomy, or the real everyday economy, which is already beginning to depend on the entire private sector and its reaction to policies. Salvador Distefano explains to us more clearly what it means to have chosen the plan proposed by Javier Milei.
Cuando vos votaste al presidente, digo vos en términos generales, el 56% de los argentinos votó al presidente. El presidente no dijo que se iba a ocupar de la micro. El presidente dijo, yo voy a arreglar la macro y la gente va a hacer tu trabajo en el sector privado. Entonces vamos a lo que dijo el presidente y lo que sucede hoy. El presidente bajó el gasto público, se peleó con un montón de gente, está racionalizando. La obra pública, que había una horda de corrupción, la paró toda. Entonces el presidente ¿Está realmente ordenando el Estado? Sí. Vos votaste a un presidente que te dijo, yo voy a hacer la racionalización y cuando tenga superávit fiscal te voy a bajar impuestos. Bueno, el impuesto país te lo va a sacar. Ayer sacó las retenciones a ganancia IVA y dicho esto en estos términos, si el presidente te cumplió con un montón de cosas, ¿por qué no te va a cumplir con esto? El problema es que vos estás desesperado porque te dé las soluciones ya de un país que estaba fundido.
Milei's economic plan has entered a critical phase. The next few months will be decisive in knowing whether the current sacrifice will translate into a sustainable recovery or whether, on the contrary, Argentina is heading towards a social explosion of unprecedented proportions. Contrary to what the opposition media is saying, for Argentines there is now an opportunity that they should take with great responsibility from the private sector, because they are being called to become the engine of economic recovery as soon as they come to understand that they are the exclusive protagonists of the model. As inflation continues to fall, salaries will continue to rise comparatively, and a timid recovery will begin to appear with the gradual improvement of purchasing power. The private sector, benefiting from tax cuts and a horizon of monetary stability, should stop waiting for the government and begin to analyze from their company or business how to grow with the new clear conditions, and knowing that fiscal balance is not negotiable and is the anchor to sustain a stable and falling dollar value. Salvador Distefano makes it very clear.
¿El privado está invirtiendo? No. ¿Y entonces? ¿Cómo querés que avancemos en un país? Que el presidente haga un ajuste y el privado no haga nada y no vamos a crecer. ¿Y cuándo vamos a crecer? Cuando el privado invierta. ¿Y cuándo va a invertir el privado? Cuando el privado se le dé la gana. Ahora, si el privado no invierte, el país no va a crecer. Con lo cual estamos con el huevo y la gallina. Algunos de nosotros decimos, no hay macro sin micro, no hay micro sin macro. Ahora este presidente tiene la idea de ordenar la macro y que la gente haga la micro. Ahora, cuando vos pasás de una economía inflacionaria a una economía con estabilidad, hay que poner capital, hay que ponerla. Entonces vos tenés tres caminos. A, ponerla. No la tengo, pedíla prestado. No me prestan, asociate con alguien. Tenés tres caminos, los tres son viables. Ahora, las escalas se han hecho todas más grandes. Entonces vos tenías un taxi y para vivir vas a tener que tener 3 taxis. Vos tenías un kiosco, vas a tener que tener 3 kioscos. Vos hacías 500 hectáreas, vas a tener que hacer 1500 hectáreas. Ahora, no maten al mensajero. La gente votó eso.
Argentines, accustomed to being external spectators of the economy, are now being forced to be protagonists, and many watch the evolution of the economic program as if they were not part of it. The reality of the changes already made will return to the productive sector a reduction in fiscal costs together with a sincerity in the value of services, so now its future begins to depend not so much on what the government does, but on how each company and business interacts with its own market in a new scenario of clear rules. The microeconomy depends on the productive sector and its degree of adaptation to the new economic model. The oversized structure of the state is being strongly attacked. Every day there are new announcements of closures, cuts and layoffs. Most of the closures are accompanied by an explanation of how the expenses were produced in that department, which ends up causing surprise and indignation at the level of uncontrolled waste that there was and should no longer be. The closure of some of the public organizations and even ministries ended up showing that many of these entities were not only unnecessary, but that they only served to maintain an unproductive bureaucracy in which to give unnecessary positions to political activists who are always left in charge of passive taxpayers. In addition, there were surprising examples. Audits carried out in organizations such as the Ministry of Women, ANSES, PAMI, or particularly ENADIS showed that staffing and budgeting were not related to the results obtained, and attendance controls revealed a large number of jobs created to grant political favors, as many employees were paid without having to go. Cutting the state in this way is a way of freeing taxpayers from the historical obligation of having to support the businesses of the politicians and officials involved. The surprising case of the former First Lady stating that she had notified the Ministry of Women that she was being hit by none other than President Alberto Fernandez himself, and that no action was taken from that organization, generated indignation throughout the political spectrum of society and ended up validating the government's discourse that the state was being used to steal. The strategy of cost reduction is unprecedented in Argentina's recent history and pursues a clear objective: to dismantle an elephant-sized bureaucratic apparatus that, according to Milei himself, is responsible for stifling the country's economic growth for decades. This change in the conception of each business is something that is taking time to be understood in the private sector, but the faster it is understood, the faster the economy will be activated. Changing a paradigm always takes time and adaptation. Once again, we turn to Salvador Distefano to express it more clearly.
Entonces, el punto es que cada uno de nosotros va a tener que salir de la zona de confort. Cuando teníamos inflación, yo te decía, te vendo este vaso, vale 10 pesos. Vos me decías, es caro, lo dejaba en la estantería porque mañana iba a valer 12. Hoy te digo, te vendo este vaso, son 10 pesos, vos me decís, es caro, y yo te digo 9, 8.50, tenés tarjeta, te doy cuota. ¿Por qué? Porque si vos te vas sin vender el vaso, en la estantería me hace perder plata. Entonces, el cambio mental que tenés que hacer en el nuevo cambio económico es brutal. Ahora, vos me preguntás a mí, ¿la gente está preparada para ese cambio? No lo sé. Acá el mayor problema son los baby boomers, los de 56 años a más, que si no se adaptan al cambio, el cambio se lo lleva puesto a ellos. Y va a haber una nueva generación de emprendedores que va a aparecer. Entonces, la pregunta es, ¿vos dónde querés estar? ¿En la tribuna mirando el cambio o en el campo de juego participando del cambio? Eso es lo que tenemos que hacer. ¿Va a ser fácil? No. ¿Va a haber gente que va a estar mal? Sí. ¿Va a haber desempleo? Sí. Pero ¿sabes qué? Los cambios se hacen siempre con dolor. Si no, no son cambios.
Milei's government economic plan is removing the weight of the state from the entire society and beyond the statistics and opinions found in the Argentine press. The process seems to be happening with such high speed that Argentines themselves do not fully understand what is happening until it is already a fait accompli. It is striking that the press and public opinion discuss and question unemployment or poverty rates that correspond to statistical closings from 2 months ago and that are the drag of a previous situation known to all. Today, the indicators are marking an evolution that excites economists, market analysts, and investors with the ability to see the daily reports of the BCRA's currency position, the fiscal surplus, and the fulfillment of obligations with the outside world. The country risk continues to fall. In a short time, it will reach around 1,000 points, and as soon as it is around 800, which is what would correspond to Argentina today, important investments will appear that are waiting for the signal. The change of mentality of the Argentines is being more difficult than straightening out the economy. Many years of populism and inflation are preventing them from seeing the clear and concrete nature of the economic plan. They continue to fear a devaluation or ask about the cepo, when everything indicates that they should be planning how to grow. The government seems to be clear that the real challenge is to demonstrate that all its drastic measures against the state itself will lead to a real improvement in the quality of life of all citizens, and not only to the macroeconomic indicators that are already showing a positive results. While unions and opponents are considering how to resist the drastic changes, the collective bargaining and a certain recovery of the economy will make wages improve their purchasing power before the end of the year, and then perhaps everyone will begin to believe more in the potential of their country. The indicators show that the worst is over and that as Argentines themselves begin to invest, their economy will grow. There will be those who question the presidential veto of the university budget and the increase for retirees, but the government made it clear that it agrees with both measures, but it will do so when it has the budget to face them. If everyone helps to move the economy, it will be achieved sooner than expected. Meanwhile, Milei has already confirmed that he will veto any project of the fiscal degenerates and will stick to his formula for fiscal balance. The fight against the political caste was the banner of Javier Milei's presidential campaign, and our channel dedicated an extensive report to it detailing who they were and how they were financed. The report is so clear and current that we even recommend watching it again. Milei promised to confront this group that is so difficult to identify and to which no one assumes their belonging so that they stop being a parasite of the state. But is he really fulfilling his promise of ending the privileges of the political class, or is it all an illusion? And the fact is that the adjustment measures are shaking the very foundations of the political structure on which Argentine democracy is built. The way of doing politics that all political parties had in recent decades did not aim at the efficiency of the state and much less at shrinking it, but rather they filled it with supporters in all departments in order to have control of all policies. The one that went the furthest was Peronism and its temporary derivation, Kirchnerism, which took over the entire state, the departments, the state companies, and even its own unions, achieving such hegemonic economic power that it ended up drowning the state's own finances from within. And the fact is that Argentine politics was moved by the caste, and the caste itself was in turn the one who managed politics. Javier Milei's position of separating the taxpayer who pays taxes from the one who lives off some income provided by the state ended up drawing a clear line in which politicians cannot defend their role without demonstrating what their real contribution to society is. And the truth is that many of them have lived for decades off their state salary, moving from position to position without any other known income. To reinforce the idea of reducing state spending, the government followed up with a series of announcements of new measures aimed at cutting representation, travel, and advisory expenses for officials. The objective is clear: to show that the government is willing to lead by example and that the adjustment begins with the political class itself. Nobody knows if these cuts are real. They could be more cosmetic than structural, but it is clear that there has never before been a philosophy in the current government that presented expenses as something paid for by taxpayers. On the contrary, Kirchnerism always behaved as if it were the owner of the state, reaching extreme cases in which Cristina Fernández had the Buenos Aires newspapers delivered to her mansion in El Calafate in Patagonia in planes from the presidential fleet. Is the political management system really being transformed under Milei, or is it all part of a populist communication strategy to maintain public support? One of the most controversial fronts in this battle against the caste is the investigation of corruption cases from previous governments. Milei promised an exhaustive review of past administrations, seeking to expose and punish corrupt practices. This initiative generated expectations among his followers, who see in it the possibility of cleaning up the Argentine political system. However, there is no correlation of real complaints being aired in the Argentine justice system. Another controversial aspect of the fight against the caste is the confrontation with the unions. Milei accused union leaders of opposing measures that, according to him, would benefit the workers they supposedly represent. This conflict highlights the complex relationship between the government, unions, and workers in Argentina. The union sector has long since moved away from defending the interests of workers and has focused on finding ways to profit from their representation with the management of social works that do not provide service and triangulating budgets with prepaid health insurance, with compulsory and obligatory fees that discount their representatives and perpetuating themselves for more than 30 years in the leadership of each union, a true caste that lives at the expense of others. Our channel has dedicated a detailed investigation to Argentine unionism and its particular position in the challenge of transforming the country. You can find the report in our videos about Argentina. The government has a great challenge in demonstrating that these measures are not just populist gestures, but part of a structural reform of the Argentine state so that it is effective and efficient. The line between the necessary reduction of public spending and the dismantling of essential services is very thin, and Milei's government will have to navigate carefully so as not to make unnecessary mistakes. The time that Argentina grants to transformative presidents is always limited and is running out for Milei. Javier Milei's popularity, once overwhelming, has begun to show signs of wear and tear. Polls reveal a drop in support for the president, a phenomenon that reflects the progressive impatience of those who do not see tangible results in their domestic economy. The economic shock implemented achieved surprising positive macroeconomic results, and the first indicators of improvement in wages, employment, and economic activity in some sectors are already visible, but for the economic takeoff to finally materialize, it depends on private investment. The countryside, one of the main drivers of the Argentine economy, currently has poor international prices for traditional commodities and is immersed in an extensive drought that seems to have no end. This context has agricultural producers in a very delicate situation and with greater risks to face a planting investment. If the government does not release them from export retentions, the harvests will be smaller and the dollars necessary for the plan will be lacking. The agricultural sector is convinced of the economic plan but is waiting for a strong signal from the government to improve the profitability expectations of its cash flows. Javier Milei's policies transcend the country's borders and are projected to the world, which looks at him with attention and surprise. Milei's determination and the magnitude of the reforms implemented have captured global attention, generating admirers and detractors of his policy. In any case, Milei managed to put the country back on the world's political and commercial agenda by posing the challenge of transforming Argentina's economy, historically dependent on the export of raw materials, into a competitive player in sectors with higher added value. The proposal to turn Argentina into an artificial intelligence hub, although ambitious, faces obstacles. Argentina is at a historic crossroads. Many can see it, and many others continue with ideological blinders on, yearning for leaders who are part of a past that only left doctrines and clientelism. As the world watches attentively, a disturbing question arises. Is the country on the verge of an unprecedented economic transformation or about to implode amid its ideological contradictions? The answer could rewrite the future of an entire nation. The responsibility does not fall solely on the government. Argentine citizens have a crucial role in the success or failure of this chosen model. Do you think Argentina will move forward with this course, or is it headed for a new failure? We read them in the comments.